My name is David Rattray, and I want to welcome you to this United LA Fireside Chat with our board president of LA Unified School District, Kelly Gonez. We're really honored to have you, board president. Thank you so much for us today.
Thanks for
And
having me.
I will do a brief introduction, but most of you know the board president. I'm so proud of being the one that gets to introduce and to interview you today as the youngest board president, youngest female board president in the history of LA Unified, and an accomplished educator, formerly a teacher and a mother. So just a privilege to all of us to have you serve. Thank you for your public service. And thank you for being with us here today. And I want to just start out with inviting you to make any kind of opening comments you want, and love to also just hear about how you and your boys are doing, and your husband and your family in these really difficult times.
Well, thank you all so much for inviting me to join you on this wonderful opportunity. I'm excited to be here and to talk about the great work going on in LA Unified, and also the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. It's been a really big week for us, as you may know, with the reopening of our schools. So much to share on that front. And I think, we've really turned a corner in terms of hope and progress with regard to our response to the pandemic, where we faced a lot of setbacks over the last year. And on a personal note, my family is doing well. I got my second dose of the vaccine yesterday. So while I'm feeling a little under the weather, I'm really excited to have that protection. And my two little boys, almost 1 and almost 3. So lots of learning going on in our household, lots of chaos, but it's joyful chaos, as I like to say.
And like so many of our parents, you're probably doing this crazy juggling between working and watching and caring for your kids. How's that going?
Well, it can be messy, certainly. Luckily, I have a sitter who helps most days, but on the times when I don't, you'll see my little faces of my sons pop in. During the board meeting a couple days ago, my 3-year-old decided he wanted to go really close to the camera and open his mouth so that everyone could see his teeth and his tongue. And so surprise visitors in many of my Zooms, but luckily people are very gracious, and working for an education organization, they recognize that we're all about kids. So we have to welcome them in, even when they're unexpected visitors.
Right, yeah. And tell us how your family's doing health-wise. Have you been able to stay free of COVID and your extended family?
We have lost several relatives in our extended family due to COVID, but luckily our immediate family, many of them are now fully vaccinated. We've got a number of, like my mom, my mother-in-law, both are essential workers, and they were able to get the vaccine pretty early on. So that was a huge relief to me, knowing my mom, who works in a hospital. I was worried about her every day of the last year, but especially through the winter, because her hospital was one of the hardest hit in terms of COVID patients. So them getting the vaccine in the beginning of the year was a huge relief. And now they've been able to meet their youngest grandson, which is really nice.
Oh, yeah, that's wonderful. Well, I'm sorry to learn about the losses in your family, Board President. That's terrible.
Yeah, it's been a tough year, but certainly we're all looking out for each other and appreciating the time, and now hopefully soon the opportunity to be together once more in a safe way.
Yeah. Well, in reading about your history, I know how proud you are of your mom and what an inspiration she is to you. I can only imagine how concerned you were, like all of us are, for our older parents during this incredible time. So congratulations that she stayed safe and now has her vaccine.
Yeah, one of the happiest days of mine over the last year, certainly. And yeah, we hold everyone a little bit closer now after this tragedy.
Yeah. Well, what a year. It would have been a pretty amazing year for you to be the board president in normal times. Now you've had to take on this amazing challenge in this crazy year. Can you reflect with a little bit? Like, how's this been for you since you've taken on the board leadership?
It's been a wild ride, certainly. On the one hand, I'm so honored to lead the board at this moment, to have been selected by my colleagues as board president, particularly during this really challenging time for so many in our school community. I know that there's a lot of challenges that the district is facing, and I really believe in the power of our board and the superintendent as leaders of our organization, as well as, of course, the many educators across our schools, to help us tackle those challenges successfully. But it is, a very busy time, and every decision, is very fraught. And so there is both a humility that I approach the work in, being able to serve as a leader in this pivotal time, but also just a recognition of the many challenges that face us, and the fact that all the decisions are complicated. Nothing is easy at this moment. And I feel compelled to just really honor the commitment of the many people in our system who have sacrificed so much over the last year.
Mhm. Well, so I have so many things I want to ask you about, but obviously top of mind for everybody is schools reopening. So talk to us a little bit about how's that going? What do we need to know? What do parents need to know? You take it from there.
Yes. Well, I guess I'll begin by, just reflecting on the last 13 months. And, really everyone in our system has spent the last 13 months responding to a crisis. Our educators had to reinvent learning online essentially overnight. And we know that many of our families have been navigating not just remote instruction, but also job losses or loss of income. And for many of our families, especially in communities like mine, have been hardest hit by COVID itself. And so as board president, one of my top priorities is just making sure we're meeting the needs of students and families at this time. So as we're embarking on this transition, we're really excited about the reopening of schools, but it is also about making sure that we're meeting the needs of not just the students who are joining us in person, but also continuing to support our students who remain online, and focusing on academics, but also prioritizing the mental health and well-being of our students, because we are all responding to a collective trauma caused by the pandemic, and supporting our staff so they can continue that hard work. Yes, this week on Tuesday, reopened our schools for the first time in 13 months. And we started with a cohort of 71 schools that have reopened this week, elementary schools and early education centers. And I don't think I can fully describe in words how wonderful it has been to see our students back on campus over the last several days. I've been at, I think, about 10 schools this week, almost every single one that has reopened early in my district. And it has just been very joyful. And, this is why we all enter this work, is to be with the people that we love, which are our students. And so it has been really, really, really wonderful. And I've been thrilled. I also have been really impressed by the safety preparations and protocols that we have in place at our schools, whether it's the MERV 13 air filters, which we have in every building, every classroom, plexiglass in the spaces where it's needed, the desks being spaced out, the stockpiles of personal protective equipment and soap and masks, hand sanitizers, the additional cleaning staff. So we have made a ton of changes to really just reassure our families and ensure that we are looking out for everyone's safety. So it's been great to see that for myself in person, and also to hear feedback from parents, students, and staff about how safe they feel due to all of those precautions being in place. We are also testing our students and staff weekly for COVID, which is quite a feat. Screening and doing temperature readings for everyone daily, obviously requiring everyone to wear masks. And then our employees have been provided access to the full vaccine regimen. And just in terms of learning on campus, things look different, certainly. In one preschool class that I visited, we saw a teacher outlining one by one how they would line up to go outside and wait for the restroom, because they could only go in socially distant in groups of 2s and 3s. One class had students using pool noodles as a way to just show them social distancing. Another class was using hula hoops for the same purpose and also to play. At recess, kids aren't using the apparatus, but they're playing with chalk and bubbles and playing games, like Simon says. So a lot of little things look very different in these contexts, but it's also exciting how much felt normal. The very first day, teachers were establishing those protocols and routines that you would in any year, especially with our littlest ones who have never been on a school campus before. And, I saw diving right into instruction. First grade class was going right into learning about verbs in the present versus the past tense. I've seen project-based learning, I've seen art, and real rigorous instruction in reading and math throughout the week. And so it really reassures me that, this wasn't just an exercise to physically reopen, but that there is real tangible academic benefit that has been derived for the students who have reopened. And obviously, students and staff have been really excited and joyful about being back, which is the best part for me.
Well, congratulations, first of all, board president. It's got to be a huge relief for all of you to get to this threshold after an agonizing year. Such a big week. We can talk more about opening if you want, but I'm also just mindful of the board motion that you got passed on early childhood education. So I want to just invite you to explain to our participants what that's about and what can we look forward to.
Absolutely. Well, and just on the reopening topic, I do want to give credit where credit is due. Our principals, plant managers, custodians have been working for months to ready their campuses and just have put in incredibly long hours to get to this point, as well as our teachers who are now lesson planning and supporting students both in their in-person cohorts and their virtual cohorts. So I just want to recognize and honor the folks within the system who have made this possible. I am but a very small part of it. And then on the early childhood front, I am a mother of 2 young children myself, as you all have heard. So I am a big advocate, both personally and professionally, for high quality early childhood education. I know firsthand the incredible learning that happens during those earliest years. And I also recognize that the COVID-19 pandemic has been particularly hard for families with young children who've had childcare upended as facilities have had to reduce hours or reduce the number of students they can serve or shut down altogether. So I'm really excited that this week, just a couple days ago, the board launched an effort, approved a motion that I authored to reach universal preschool for every 3 and 4-year-olds in Los Angeles by 2024-2025. And as I said, I authored the motion and I'm really happy to share that it passed unanimously. So there is strong support on our board and in our district for this effort. In the immediate future, the resolution calls for some of our COVID relief dollars to be used as early as the fall to expand early transitional kindergarten at schools where the program does not yet exist. So we're estimating that we'll be able to open 25 new programs on campuses in the fall. An ETK is, just for those who may not be aware, it's a full day program for children who are 4 years old at the time, but will turn 5 later in the school year. And right now, more than 100 of our elementary schools don't have access to this program. So we'll be reducing that gap by a quarter in just the next few months, which is really exciting. And then over the next several months, our district staff will work with partners and Unite LA is certainly welcome to be part of that group to develop a long-term plan for reaching universal preschool in the next 3 years. And we believe that this is a really opportune time, perhaps the best time for an effort like this, with an influx of public school investment, as well as heightened interest at both the state and federal governments. So the idea is that this plan would ensure that LA Unified is prepared for how we would reach universal once those investments arrive, and that we're being really proactive about achieving that goal. And I want to be clear, it won't just take LA Unified in order to enable us to serve all 3 and 4-year-olds by 2024. It's really going to take a variety of providers, including nonprofit community providers, home-based providers, to reach all of our youngest learners. And it's critical that we work together in a collaborative way to develop and execute this plan. But that's all the more reason to start this work now, to really make sure that that plan is thoughtful and collaborative, and that we can expand our early childhood programs equitably and with fidelity to ensure high quality is present in every location. So super excited about that effort, and so appreciate UnitedLA's partnership in that work.
Well, thank you for your leadership, Board President. We've been fighting for this for over a decade, so this is like a dream come true for us to have the Board President author a motion and get the board to vote unanimously. And I'm sure it was music to the ears of a lot of our nonprofit partners to hear you say you expect it's a mixed delivery system and that you know the solutions are going to come from different sectors. But ultimately, we all ought to be committed to have that universal access of high quality, especially for our lowest income families. So bless you for that. And we're all in. So you have a blank check with UnitedLA to serve in that effort. I just want to pause for a second for all of our participants. We will, I'll have a number of questions for the board president, but we will allow you to put your questions in a chat and I'll surface your questions to the board president. So use your chat function if you have questions you want to ask. So board president, obviously one of the biggest challenges ahead for all of us is the learning loss, however you want to phrase it, that has happened because of this whole year. And so tell us a little bit about, we do know that there's an infusion of federal and state dollars being made available to school districts and communities to help support, especially our lowest income families and students that have suffered so much with the digital divide and their inability sometimes to access online education. Tell us a little bit about what you see as the possibilities to recover some of the lost learning and include too how partners like us and others in the community writ large can be part of what is the recovery for these young people.
Absolutely. This is such an important question, but I would reframe slightly. I think it's important as we approach summer and next school year that we're looking at spurring and accelerating student achievement rather than just recovering what was lost, because we know we can't do over this year, but we do know what outcomes we want for our students ultimately. And so it's our job to meet our students where they are and give them a host of supports and resources to help them reach those eventual goals. And we know that distance learning hasn't been perfect and that learning has certainly been impacted, especially for our highest needs students and families. So it takes intentionality to make sure that our district leaders and our educators focus on deficits, but rather the opportunities that exist, especially with that influx of funding, as you have stated. So for summer, we certainly view this as a critical opportunity to provide learning access to all students. And so we are brainstorming around a plan of summer school for all who want it. Certainly we would not require it, but offering programs both in person and online to teach students critical academic skills, as well as summer enrichment programs, because we recognize that the things that make students really engaged and love learning are some of what has not occurred as easily this school year in the virtual learning environment. So it's important to do the foundational academic skills, but also to focus on enrichment and engagement of our students. One of the most hotly debated topics currently is around our calendar for next school year. So the district is considering adding additional instructional days next year, as well as more professional development days for our teachers to really support students and provide more time for socio-emotional supports, as well as for academic learning. We did do a survey of our families, and while the survey showed a majority of support for expanding the school year, it is certainly not universal. And I think it's generally the case that the calendar is just one of the most controversial topics that a school board will ever consider, particularly here in Los Angeles. And for me, another critical piece is how are we using that additional time? Additional time on its own, just to do what we've been doing, is not enough. I know that there has to be a major focus on socio-emotional supports, the well-being of our students, because if we don't take care of those needs, our kids will not be able to thrive academically. And we know that this year has been really traumatic. So we have to focus on healing and socio-emotional needs first, and then the academic supports will come. So there's a lot of different things that we're considering, initiatives in order to help students recover from the pandemic and also accelerate. But the summer and the additional time during the fall are just two of the hot topics that currently exist.
Right. Well, it's music to my ears to hear you address student-centered, student-engaged, student enrichment. As you may know, we're a huge supporter of linked learning, and we will often promote for high school students some kind of career exploration, internships, job shadowing tied into their career aspirations and their academic studies is the richest way to motivate and develop a young high school student. It would worry us to have summer schools be double block algebra,
Right.
retake or something. Now, it's not a way to motivate our high school students, but I can tell you get that. I know you do as a teacher yourself. But it'll be
Absolutely.
exciting for us to work together with you in the district on how to make those summers for now and maybe for forever even more valuable.
Certainly. And, I think I didn't address the part of your question of how we can all work together. I will circle back on that now.
Okay.
I think one, we'd love thought partnership because these plans are being developed as we speak. And the district has not always been great about proactively engaging partners as we're developing these types of plans. But this is a great opportunity for everyone to be at the same table and provide feedback on families and students that you've worked with directly, because we know sometimes our nonprofit providers have a direct line to families who are harder to reach for the district. It's also about, I think, just this pandemic has shown the holistic needs of our students and how many are being failed by the social safety net. And so I think it is really about creating that village of supports around our students centered at our schools. And that requires working in partnership with community organizations and nonprofit providers. And so I think we have to think, we have to be really thoughtful about how we can maintain those partnerships in the long term, make them sustainable, and really prioritize access to our highest needs families who we know have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic and all of the resulting crises.
I know that the superintendent likes the earn and learn model. We've often been huge proponents of learn and earn or earn and learn, whatever you call it, where students get an opportunity to get paid while they're actually learning. And we've been fierce advocates at a federal and state level for better funding that, especially for some of our districts that are more impacted. So we know that there actually be a lot of money available. And I'm wondering if you could comment a little bit on for our high school students, giving them more learn and earn, knowing a lot of these families are needing their high school students sometimes to contribute and raise and use, earn some money across the summer.
Absolutely. And I think it's a expanding paid work-based learning opportunities is a great example of the kind of thinking we need to engage on with regard to how we spend these federal dollars. It's not about how do we plug holes, how do we pay for ideas that we already had pre-pandemic. It's really about being innovative, centering equity, and thinking about how we can transform our public education system to meet the needs that have emerged during this crisis, but also the needs that were unmet in March of 2020. And so I think paid work-based learning is a great example of an idea we should think about, the expansion of linked learning, because we know the sit and get learning model that we've used for decades, maybe a century in public education doesn't work for all students, and it also doesn't recognize the different economic circumstances that our families find themselves in, which existed pre-pandemic but have been exacerbated over the last year. So I'm definitely interested in that. I believe that, so we got a presentation a couple of days ago at our last board meeting about recovery and kind of just the smorgasbord of ideas that exist at this moment. And I believe that the expansion of linked learning and more paid work-based learning opportunities was on that list. So I think it's definitely something the board is thinking about.
So now let me talk about money a little bit. With the recent infusion of federal dollars, those will be significant for LAUSD, both some of the Title I expansion and the federal dollars for the Recovery Act, but also that's a state level. It looks like we're actually better off than we thought we were going to be. So I think there's a sort of a dual part of this question is, tell us a little bit about how those resources are going to be used to support our students. But then also we are concerned, as you would be, about the misconception that LAUSD and other districts no longer are going to have greater financial needs and need more resources. And I'll invite you also to say, how are you going to address questions when people say, geez, you're awash with money. Why do you say you need more?
Those are certainly issues that we are already thinking about. And you're right about the remaining long-term structural challenges we're facing. We know that public education has been underfunded for decades, in California in particular. And so we have to be thoughtful about the sustainability of these investments. We recognize that these are one-time dollars that we have just a few years to use. And so we have to be thoughtful about how we can make those investments sustainable. But I also think it's about building the case for the full funding of public education. This is a huge opportunity, the largest investment in public education we've seen in this country for decades, maybe the largest investment ever. And so we have to be really thoughtful about showing the value of fully investing in public education. This is a way to create those proof points for when urban public schools are funded at the levels that they should. These are the outcomes we can achieve for our highest need students and families. So the board, I know, is really excited to dig in more about the recovery dollars. A plan is being developed, and there are sort of ongoing iterative conversations with the board and the district staff and the superintendent on just how to best put them to use. As I touched on a little bit in the last question, I think we want to capitalize on this moment to think about how to restructure public education to better serve our students. It's a chance to be innovative and to try new approaches that were maybe dreams that we had, but we never had the resources to execute before. And it's about centering ourselves on equity and anti-racism. It's not about rebuilding what we had, but creating a new transformed reality that does justice to our highest needs families who have been most impacted by this crisis. And so just very early thoughts to share from the conversation we had a couple days ago. One example, the Division of Instruction is thinking through a mindset shift from focusing on remediation to instead focusing on great first instruction. And what does that look like for all of the diverse learners that we serve in LA Unified to prevent our students from falling behind in the first place? It's about thinking about how we can exit the credit recovery business by examining school schedules and how we could create a more flexible schedule that's more conducive to teaching and learning and just in time supports for students who may be falling behind. So nothing is completely set, but I wanted to just provide some of those examples of the kind of thinking we're trying to employ to ensure that these opportunities aren't just about redoing what's been done, but really transforming our thinking with students at the center.
Well, good for you to say, show the public if you more fully fund education. That is the case that has to be made to get taxpayers to say, I will tax myself for more resources. So you touched on a little bit earlier, but let's go back to this question of mental health and well-being of our students and their families. As you referenced, I mean, the degree of trauma that some of our students have experienced directly in their own lives and with their family members and lost family members is just almost heartbreaking. How will LAUSD try to support the mental health and well-being of the students?
This is absolutely a top priority of our district. Feel acute urgency in this area. The community that I represent in the East San Fernando Valley has been one of the most disproportionately impacted by COVID, not just in terms of comparison to Los Angeles County, but the nation as a whole. During the winter surge, Pacoima had the highest rates of COVID-19 of immunity in LA County. And for much of the pandemic, 4 of the top 10 highest infection rates existed in neighborhoods in my board district. So that level of devastation cannot be overstated. It has impacted so many of our families, and it has made many of them reluctant to return in person as we reopen in a hybrid model, even as the rates have declined significantly. So I completely understand and believe that those feelings of our families are valid. And I'm hopeful that with regard to hybrid, we can continue to prove both the value to students of returning in person, but also the rigor and that hopefully more families will opt in. When it comes to mental health, just another example of the need, I've been visiting schools, and one of my principals in the Northeast San Fernando Valley shared, this is a high school, that they formed a bereavement group for students because so many students had directly lost someone in their family. So this is the reality for many of our kids, and many of them were experiencing trauma even before COVID. So as we look to the fall, we are planning to hire additional counselors and psychiatric social workers, especially to serve those communities that have been most impacted. So deploying that staff on an equity basis. We're looking at ways of providing additional mental health training to all of our staff, and building out regular time during the school day for socio-emotional learning and support. That's actually one change that I think we've seen during distance learning that we want to maintain, that at the elementary level, there has been dedicated time every day in every classroom to touch base with students on their socio-emotional well-being. And we have had advisories at all of our high schools, which only existed in some places prior to COVID, where kids could check in and build those socio-emotional muscles and really make sure that they're feeling well. I also think in terms of mental health, we have to look at the arts and music and outdoor learning and other programs that really provide joy during the school day, because we haven't had as much of that over the last year as we would like. And when we think about mental health, those are really protective factors that help build our students up, help them connect to school, connect to peers, so that they're better able to deal with trauma that they might encounter in their everyday lives.
I'm so glad you mentioned the arts too. That's one of those ongoing issues that we know we've underfunded in public education, but in a time like this, it's even more exposed as a sort of need. So I hope we can commit to greater investment in building back our arts education, our music education, in a sustainable way. But I agree with you, in a short term, it has even a more significant protective factor. So now let's talk about race and equity. I mean, obviously, this last months on top of COVID, the students have dealt with this rawness of them and inequities that's been exposed. And while it's challenging, it also is that we should have been addressing for centuries, literally, in terms of structural racism that have been swept under the rug. And so now they're there, they're raw. What's your vision of how does the district itself look at structural racism? How do we all, as a larger society, how do we support our youth in a whole new way that really confronts that?
Absolutely. Well, this past year has been an opportunity of really critical reflection for our public school system about how to be actively anti-racist, how to challenge the vestiges of racism that have existed in our public schools, as you said rightfully, for decades, for centuries, since the inception of schools in our country, and how we can equip our educators to help support students with developing tools to combat and challenge white supremacy. Even before last year, LA Unified has been a leader on this topic. We were one of the earliest districts to develop ethnic studies classes because we recognize the value in ensuring that our students, over 80% of whom are students of color, see themselves reflected in the learning, recognize and appreciate the contributions of communities of color, and also recognize that traditional American history, the narratives about our countries have been shaped through a white lens, and it is really about challenging those narratives. It's so critical for them to have those types of opportunities, not just in high school, but across all grade levels, to really engage meaningfully with their heritage and their history. And that's true for our students of color, but also for the white students that we serve as well. But there's, of course, more work to do. The LA board actually voted a few years ago to make ethnic studies a graduation requirement, and that change was never implemented due to a lack of funding. And I think that it was seen as something that could be thrown by the wayside, that it wasn't a top priority for the district. And so in August of 2020, I was proud to bring forward a resolution on ethnic studies in LA Unified, and the board unanimously passed that motion to further integrate the subject of ethnic studies into our preschool through 8th grade curriculum, recognizing that high school is too late, but also ensure that in the next 2 years, all high school students can take at least one ethnic studies class and then prepare a strategic action plan to make ethnic studies a real graduation requirement by the 23-24 school year. So revisiting something that there was already a commitment to, but it was unfulfilled. And I think really just recognizing that this is an urgent priority for our students. And, it's something that we've heard a lot of voices locally from our students and from our educators and parents that they're demanding to see in their classrooms today. With California's updated model curriculum, we are also leveraging this moment to update our framework and curricula locally. And so looking forward to future conversations sitting side by side with educators and community advocates and students about how to operationalize that graduation requirement so that all students are exposed to this important learning while in high school, but also how do we create that pipeline so that that learning is built up over all the years that our students are in school.
So talk about resources a little bit, Board President. Of course, one of the biggest challenges too is how do we allocate resources in a more equitable fashion? And LCFF was meant to do that at a district level by the state. And I know within the district, that's not a simple thing to actually allocate resources based on need, because in any one year, a place in a district that's a little more affluent thinks it's a takeaway. And I know the CENI, the CENI index was meant to be some guidepost for that. With the additional resources we'll be getting from the federal and state government, there will be an opportunity to allocate those even more equitably. And I wonder what you think is ahead on that question.
Absolutely. Well, I think that equitably distributing those funds is the right thing to do and is aligned with the approaches that we've been taking as a board over the last several years. So the Student Equity Needs Index, the CENI, was created several years ago as a way to ensure more equitable distribution of funds within LA Unified. And the board actually revamped the CENI a few years ago. I think it was in 2018. All the years blend together a bit, given all the crises we've gone through. But we updated the formula to take greater account for community factors, which could impact student learning, like community violence and health issues that might exist in communities. And so we have that updated formula, and we've seen, I think, really positive results from leveraging that new formula and for putting more funds into that formula to ensure that a greater proportion of schools' budgets are equitably determined. When it comes to the new funding, so the superintendent has committed, I believe, to an additional $70 million that would go through the CENI. So I believe that puts us in around the $300 million range in terms of funds that are equitably distributed. But when you think about the district, we have an $8.2 billion budget. And so that remains a small percentage of how we allocate our funding overall. And so there are ongoing conversations about how to spread equitable budgeting more broadly throughout our budget. One interesting and emerging piece is we've gotten a grant from the federal government to create a student-centered funding formula. And so similar to the CENI, this would be a weighted student formula. And the idea is that it could be applied across a variety of funding streams that we receive. So there would be alignment between Title I of our federal funding, Title II, which funds professional development. And so that's an effort that our budget staff is currently undergoing. They're developing this formula as we speak, consulting with community groups and other interested stakeholders. So that is a really exciting effort. And I think that will be the next step in terms of enhancing our work with regard to equitable budgeting and also expanding the percentage of our budget that goes through an equity-based funding formula.
Thank you. So let me sort of transition when we talk about race and equity to the issues around dual language and Spanish language. We noted that the LA School Report published an article about your own personal experience with Spanish language, and given your personal experience and that of your parents, love to have you just talk a little bit about strengthening our dual language approach in LAUSD. What works? What can we do to support it?
Absolutely. It's one of the, I think our dual language efforts are one of the most exciting ways that LA Unified has really evolved its programmatic offerings in recent years in a way that centers and affirms the intrinsic value that our multi-language learners bring into the classroom. When it comes to English learners, for so long, they have been really framed with a deficit thinking, and that hasn't recognized the assets that our non-English speakers, our multilingual speakers bring to our schools. And so I'm really proud of the work we've done with regard to dual language. Since the passage of Prop 58 in 2016, we've been able to dramatically expand the number of dual language programs in the district. Just in my board district in the East San Fernando Valley, we had one of the lowest numbers of dual language programs when I first entered the board back in 2017. And we've actually been able to triple the amount of those programs that exist. And across the district, we don't just have programs in Spanish, but Chinese and Armenian, Korean, Arabic. We're developing a Tagalog, a Filipino language program as well. And so these are just really wonderful programs in terms of the affirmation that it sends to our students and families that, you have assets and strengths, and our schools recognize that rather than treating you as an other. But also we know that there are huge academic benefits from dual language programs, both for those who are learning English as English learners, but also for native English speakers learning in another language. Another really exciting piece of that expansion is in the early education space. And so we have an early education dual language pilot where 17 of our preschool programs are offering instruction in 2 languages. And when you think about early ed, it is exactly the right time to provide these types of opportunities. Students are just gaining language in general. And so, of course, it's the perfect time with the brain growth to offer instruction in 2 languages. And we now have, because of that effort, have a built out Spanish dual language pathway from preschool, so from age 3 to 12th grade in the East San Fernando Valley. So I think replicating those types of approaches is the future of LA Unified. And I think that there is a really nice tie-in with our preschool expansion effort. So as we are adding more seats to get to that universal preschool goal in 2024-25, as many as possible of them should be bilingual early education programs. And we have the staff to be able to do that. A lot of them have these language assets already. It's about providing the training and helping them get properly certificated to teach in that language. But I think there's a lot of promising work being done in that area.
That's terrific. And as you could guess, from an employer point of view, we do think of it as an asset. We were supportive of the seal of biliteracy that was passed by the legislature a long time ago, because when we are hiring, we consider it totally an asset if we can hire someone who's multilingual. Many of our companies actually won't even hire somebody for certain positions unless they are. So it's a huge asset for a young person to have more than one language. In Europe, it's just the norm.
Right.
You can't even really function in Europe without knowing at least 2 languages, if not 3.
And so it's really about setting that standard, changing the standard from recognizing that being bilingual and biliterate and bicultural is the expectation that we want to see for our students by the time they graduate, and then resourcing appropriately to ensure that students can meet that outcome.
So I'll shift to a couple of questions that have come in the chat, Board President. So one question that came in was, I applaud what you have said about the upcoming future of LAUSD. Many of these things have been articulated before. What will be the difference this time to provide quality education for all?
Well, I do think that resources matter. And as we talked about a little bit, David, earlier, is just that the resources have not been there when it comes to public education. While LCFF did increase the amount of resources that existed in LA Unified, we know that it was nowhere near enough to meet all of the holistic needs of our students and families, especially in our highest needs communities. And so I think that this federal influx of funds with regard to COVID, but also we know that President Biden is proposing greatly increased federal funding in education in his regular budget. So I think that this influx of funds creates a huge opportunity to make real some of these promises. But, from a stakeholder lens, it's about accountability, right? It's about making sure that the promises that are being made, the initiatives that are being launched are carried out with fidelity. Um, the ethnic studies example is a great one because, several years ago, the board committed to ethnic studies and then it never happened. And so I do think it is about, as a leader in the district, about keeping my eye on what is best for students and ensuring that we're making progress towards those big strategic goals. But I also think it's about stakeholders holding us accountable and making sure that we're really working towards what's in the best interest of our students and families. And that when the district does promise or does launch those initiatives, that they're sustained over time and that the appropriate support is given so that these great ideas don't die in the implementation stage.
Yeah, now you've been a board member long enough to know there's a graveyard of really great board resolutions passed and long since forgotten.
I've got
Those
a
of
couple
us,
of myself.
so I applaud you to call it out too. And as a board president, you have a unique position sometimes to work with your fellow board members and try to make sure that rather than just layer on new ones, maybe we build on implementing things that have already been passed and that a new idea should build on instead of just layer and forget to implement the past one.
Yeah, and if I might add, I do think the board development work we're doing right now is very relevant. So unlike a number of other districts across the country in LA Unified, the board hasn't, at least in recent years, laid out a vision or set strategic goals for the organization for what we want to see in terms of student outcomes when a student completes their time with LA Unified. And so the board is currently engaging in this work to lay out its vision and goals for students, as well as the conditions we would want to set to help them reach those goals. And then the superintendent will be developing a strategic plan to implement those. And, I think maybe not the most exciting of efforts, but I think that's really foundational. You need to have a board that is united and setting out a clear vision for its expectations. That is the role of the board. And so I think that work will be really critical, especially as we look at these federal relief funds and how we can best spend them to support students.
So another question we have is related to that. It goes, thank you, Board President Gonez, for your leadership in recent years and the resolution you helped to pass to track critical education indicators for youth in foster care. So as one of our foster care leaders, data has now begun to get collected and shared by the district, but will you continue to keep, and it got cut off, but I think what you're saying is that's one of those follow through things. Will we keep tracking that data and keep utilizing it?
Definitely. Yes, I'm definitely committed to continuing that pressure. And, the work that I've done in my past is really about supporting vulnerable students. That's the lens that I lead with, that, these students, whether it's students experiencing homelessness, students interacting with the child welfare system, our English learners, they have to be at the forefront of our minds as leaders. They are not secondary, they are central. And so I'm 100% committed to continuing that work. And I think, again, in honesty and candor, that's an example of work that is unfulfilled, unfinished. We've got the report, we have the data. Now, what will we do with it is the next step. And I think that this moment of reflection on the pandemic is the perfect time to really accelerate those efforts and continue them so that we can see them to completion and fruition.
So another question I got is around school police, difficult issue that you took up last year. So the question kind of is, what's your vision for the future of school police with everything else that's going on?
It is definitely a difficult issue. And, I think that I've learned a lot over the last year from our students about their experiences on campus with law enforcement officers. And whenever I talk about this, I try to be really clear that it's not about the individuals. It's not about the individual officers, because many of them are dedicated and hardworking and doing their best, but it is about the system and the institution of policing. And I think hearing from our Black students in particular has helped me realize that the presence of police on campus is traumatic and harmful inherently to many of our Black students and our families, and creates an unwelcoming environment in many ways. And we've heard that directly from students, both in surveys and in their testimony in the boardroom. And so I did support the motion to reduce our school police budget by 35%, $25 million in June of last year. Sorry, having trouble remembering a little bit. And the board in the last several months has voted to approve a Black student achievement plan that would reinvest those dollars in an ongoing way. So not a one-time investment, but an ongoing investment in the futures of our Black students, to provide psychiatric social workers, academic and mental health counselors, wraparound supports, partnerships with communities, in order to ensure that our students are getting the resources and care that will really help them thrive, rather than policing their behavior and making them feel unwelcome on campus. We are piloting a new model with our school police, which is more of a neighborhood response. And so if there's an incident on campus, the school police are somewhat nearby to be able to respond in an emergency. I don't know that I can fully answer the question because I don't know how things will progress. I think we want to see how that model works. I think we want to see how the new school climate coaches that we're investing on our campuses, how are they able to help us build up a muscle of preventative care versus law enforcement intervention when issues arise. So I think we'll have to monitor this, and I want to work in partnership with the voices of community and of youth and advocates who have been pushing for this change for many years.
I think you have a long history of supporting restorative justice and combating the school to prison pipeline. We were privileged to support legislative changes to change willful defiance and make it more difficult to expel a Black or brown student. It does seem like a moment where we have to reflect. As much as we've done, this year has taught us it's not nearly enough.
Certainly.
And I'm glad to hear you say some specific targeting for our Black students. In the LA Compact, we continue to see data that shows in some instances where our Latinx students are doing better at college enrollment and persistence, our Black students, we are still not serving anywhere nearly as close as well as we should. And love to have you elaborate a little bit more on that investment that you're talking about for our African American students.
Certainly. So the Black Student Achievement Plan, which the board approved, I believe it's about $34 million in an ongoing way to provide additional supports to our schools that are serving the highest populations of Black students, and that have some indicators in terms of those Black students not being supported as they should be, whether that's chronic absenteeism or GPAs. And so this is an infusion of resources. It's really focused, I think, on mental health and well-being, because we know that, the academic achievement of our Black students won't be able to affirm their potential if they don't feel supported and safe in schools. And so that's step one. There is also support with regard to the school climate coaches who are going to help our schools build on restorative justice, build on, the banning of willful defiance suspensions, to really create a culture that's welcoming, and that helps our students develop their skills rather than punishing, rather than being punitive about how students are supported discipline wise. And then there are also a host of academic supports that are built in. And then I think one other important piece that's included is that there will also be oversight, because as we talked about with a couple of other issues, it is about the community having a voice in how these investments are made and whether they're being implemented with fidelity and whether we're seeing the outcomes that we need. And so there is a Black Student Achievement Steering Committee that is being stood up with community voices included, with student voices and teachers and parents, that will be overseeing these investments, meeting regularly and advising the board on what more we can do to support our Black students. And I think that's critical because I think that those who are most impacted by our policies have to be the voices we are hearing from. They have to be the ones driving the conversation for what needs to change. So I think that that is really critical. There's a number of other efforts with regard to supporting our Black students, but that's the main one that I would highlight.
Terrific. So I have one last question, and then I'll give you a chance to close, Board President. So my last question is on the digital divide. Obviously, this last year has exposed how deep and inequitable that divide is. And the district and so many have done heroic things for short-term solutions of hotspots and Chromebooks. But what role do you think the district should play? As you might know, we formed with LADC the LA deal because our census exposed that we need to have long-term solutions to build a fiber backbone in every one of our neighborhoods. So loved your comment a little bit on permanently closing the digital divide.
I view access to high-speed internet as an infrastructure issue, same as water and all of the essential utilities that we rely upon municipalities to provide for us. Everyone deserves access to high-quality broadband internet. And you're right, I am very proud of all the work that the district has done with regard to providing a mobile device and a hotspot to every student that needs them. But those are Band-Aids. Those are not the long-term solution. And so the board passed a closing the digital divide resolution a couple of months ago, which is very focused on how can we work with partners and providers to create those long-term solutions and to make sure that as those solutions are being crafted, the needs of our students are at the forefront of those efforts. And so right now the district is actually doing a survey and some data analysis to understand the quality of access for our students and households at this moment. And I think that will help us when it comes to the next steps of that effort. But we are engaging in those conversations right at this moment. And I really appreciate Unite LA's leadership in that work because it is a huge forefront of our social justice fights for now, but also for years to come.
Yeah, I'll just acknowledge we've been inspired, Board President, by cities around the country like Chattanooga, Tennessee, that actually built out their own fiber backbone and now can provide free, if necessary, high-speed internet service to any resident in Chattanooga. And those kind of options require public leadership. So thank you for yours. We'll need our public leaders to say we should solve this. It means we have to own the systems. Mm-hmm. So let me just give it back to you. Thank you so much for this conversation. We're very fortunate to have you as our public servant serving Angelino students. So thank you for your service, and I'll leave it to you if you want to make any final statements.
Well, thank you so much, David, for allowing me the opportunity to have this really thoughtful conversation with you. I am humbled, as I said, to lead at this moment and also to be a leader in the district as a Latina, as a mom, a daughter of an immigrant, and the youngest woman to ever hold this position. And it is a privilege to serve the students and families of my community and of the entire district. And I hope, the issues that we've raised are critical, not just to the students in our schools, but to the future of our city and of our country. And so I hope that everyone who has joined us, that we can work in partnership moving forward to really tackle these issues in the long term and ensure that our students receive the future that they deserve. So I appreciate you and Unite LA and all of those who are so committed to the students in our schools. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. On behalf of Unite LA and the LA Compact partners, thank you so much for being with us. And I hope you and your husband and your boy stay well.
Thank you so much. I hope so too. We'll keep it.
Okay. Bye-bye now.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you to all of you that participated today.